My name is Marty Reinsel, and you see the title up here. We're going to talk about de-escalation and personal safety for the next couple of hours. Challenging situations, ways to manage them, how do you prepare, how do you navigate through them. You don't ask for problematic situations as part of your job, but the reality is they do come up. You see my name there too. Martin is my formal name, but pretty much everybody calls me Marty. And in terms of my background, I have a degree in psychology, and the LMHC stands for I'm a licensed mental health counselor, and I've been in my field for 27 years. The vast majority of my work in the 27 years I've been doing this has been in really highly intense psychiatric and crisis triage settings. So I live up in Seattle, and I do a lot of work in King County, but I've been doing more down in Pierce and Thurston counties, even up north as well. And I get to interact with basically 5 different types of groups. They all have one thing in common. They deal with the public. One group is healthcare workers. Another one is people that do like social service and outreach in communities. A third group is educators and people that work within school systems. Fourth one is law enforcement. I get to do trainings and collaborate with law enforcement in terms of how do we improve systems and delivery of mental health and outreach in the community. And the fifth one is folks like you, people that work in a variety of different capacities. I was hired by a grocery co-op a couple of weeks ago to talk because they're dealing with the public all the time, and they see more unpredictable behaviors in their grocery stores. So they're like, we want to have a proactive approach. We want to see better outcomes. We want to be on the same page. Two and a half almost hours of training is not going to make every fix for every possible situation. My goal and hope of this training discussion is a couple of things. One, we all have elements of common sense that have us thinking, perhaps I should do this, X, Y, or Z in a situation as it arises. And I want to support the things that you're thinking and back it up with what we know. Additionally, there's a couple of things that are a little bit counterintuitive. They go perhaps against what your intuition says. And I want to shine a light on those as well. And if you walk out of this a couple of hours later with some more skills, maybe 1 or 2 different approaches that you didn't have previously, then hopefully that's success. And additionally, if we can help make sure that everybody's on the same page in terms of what are the expectations, how can we prevent problematic situations or provide early intervention, all the better. Okay, so welcome everybody. Let me get into this presentation. I've got a few slides. Let me pardon while I pull this up here. I've got a few slides that really kind of set the table for the discussion today. This first one is really important to get us thinking about and framing what's our experience, what pushes your buttons, and what pushes people's buttons in general. I know for me, there are certain words that push buttons. Sometimes it's interesting, it's less the words people point at me, but more around the people around me, whether it's coworkers, other people that are in a vulnerable spot. You can say things to me. I've heard a lot working in psychiatric hospitals and crisis triage. Like I've heard every curse word, everything possible, right? But when you say it to somebody else, it will push my buttons. Additionally, there's certain physical touches and physical approaches that will push my buttons, and I find a lot of people pushes them too. One of the examples I gave when I was here on Tuesday a couple days ago was like, anybody touches my face? Like, I don't know about you, but if somebody's going to touch my face, they better know me really well. Hopefully they love me, right? Like, just don't go around touching my face. If somebody was, out there in the community with you in the public space or coming up to the front desk and they're like wanting to touch your face, that's bizarre. That pushes buttons and that triggers unexpected behavior from us. So let's highlight this and get us thinking about what pushes your buttons. And then I'm going to circle back to this probably during the second half, but I want us also thinking about how people and organizations are like big ships. What's the similarity and what does it relate to this discussion? The other thing is, and this slide's got a lot on it, when we're dealing with other people, look at this top half of this slide, I want you thinking about what behavior from other people concerns you. What is it? Again, is it a touch? Is it a statement? Is it a potential threat? And what might that look like? And specifically, what behavior from others feels unsafe to you? And I like people thinking about, are your answers the same for these first 2 questions? Sometimes we have slight differences about what concerns us versus what feels unsafe. And I'll plant a seed as well. When I'm talking about these concerns that tend to stand out the most, it's really about behavior. What behavior is safe? What behavior is not safe? So we'll circle back to that. What behaviors from others might be cues or clues to potential escalation? Are we seeing things? Are you seeing examples of a person doing something that appears aggressive, whether it's balling up a fist, moving towards someone, versus somebody else whose behavior is odd and bizarre, but it's more to themselves? Perhaps they're talking to themselves, they're not making eye contact with you. If anything, they might be shying away from you. Look at the next point. What resources do you have when an escalating situation is unfolding? And for you as an organization, for LOTT, what do you have available in addition to just calling Steve and saying, hey, security, we need you over here? What else do we have to help communicate to each other that something might be increasing? Again, what happens if somebody gets behind one of those gated areas or gets to a back office? How do we communicate about this effectively? And then the bottom. Kind of already introduced this first point, what pushes your buttons, but I also want you really thinking about where do you carry your stress and tension in your body. All of us carry stress and tension. You know it. You know it's those areas that tighten up on you. Is it your shoulders? Is it your neck? Is it your back? Right? I get it in my jaw. I talk a lot. I'm also a drummer, so I feel it in my hands. Like today's commute was fine coming from Seattle, but Tuesday, it was a mess around Thorn Lane in Tacoma. It was really bad. And I'm getting up in the traffic. I can feel the tension on my hand on the steering wheel. We all carry our stress and tension somewhere. My hope for you is that you feel it, that you recognize it when it comes up, because that can be a useful tool if you recognize it. But if we don't recognize it, it can actually work against us. Additionally, what is my stress response? So we all have stress. We're all adults. In 2020, life is stressful. So how does your stress response come out? What does it look like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like? And have you ever tried to describe it before? And my big thing is I really want us to try to be as descriptive in nature more than use in judgmental terms. Nobody likes to be judged. I could ask around, who likes to be judged in the room? Nobody likes to be judged, right? You want people to just take you for who you are, right? Sometimes, though, we judge ourselves. And we use terms like good, bad, right, wrong. And I invite you, stress is just stress. It's part of our humanity. And if we understand our stress response and we can describe it, like, again, using words that can like write a caption to a picture, that might be more useful to help us better understand how we can use it to our advantage. And then the other one is, what are my threat alarms? What can I do to maintain personal awareness during highly stressful situations? And I'll talk more about the threat alarms as we go. So the other seed to really plant as part of this discussion is getting you thinking about what might be a difficult question that you want to ask somebody when a situation is getting hot, when it's getting difficult. Similarly, is there a statement, specifically a statement of redirection, that you might need to make while a situation is escalating? And my question to you is, have you ever practiced asking that question or making that statement? If you have, you're probably more well-equipped to be able to manage it as things come up. But if you haven't practiced it, probably not as well. I mean, again, I'll give my drummer example. If I'm playing a new song and I haven't practiced it before, I'm not going to play it really well. If I practice it, it's going to be a little better. Let me give you an example based upon my professional experience. So working in involuntary psychiatric hospitals, again, are a very, very interesting place to work. If you want to ask questions at the break or at the end, I'm happy to share any information, stories, whatever. What really was impactful to me, as a young professional, I understood that I quickly had to ask two questions. And I had to try to ask them as evenly and as matter of fact as possible. And those two questions, working in a psychiatric hospital, are these. Are you feeling like hurting yourself? Are you feeling like hurting anybody else? Now, I can stand in front of you here in March 2020 and say it very matter-of-factly and evenly. When I was a newer professional, it did not come out like that. My voice would crack, it would creak, it kind of have a sing-songy thing, and it would sound like this. Are you feeling like hurting yourself? You feeling like hurting anybody else? And right there, I kind of lost the person, right? I mean, would you be very confident talking to somebody whose voice is creaking and cracking like that, right? Probably not so much. So again, if there is a question that you find that you might have to ask, can you practice it? Because I had to practice it. And when I'd work with new employees at the hospital, and I'd say, this is something you got to practice so that you can deliver this in a neutral and objective manner. And again, when we're helping people out that are having a hard time, they're often picking up, they're working a lot off of vibe. I've had so many patients and clients I've worked with over the years. They say, when I'm in crisis, I don't hear everything. I'm working off of vibe or energy. And if you come across as a threat to me, I'm going to respond. If you come across as not a threat, I'm more likely to work with you. And so I want you to think about this. How do you present in a way that is non-threatening? Little things make a difference. We'll talk about things like hand positioning. I like to make sure people can see my hands. I like to make sure, when I'm talking to somebody, if they're upset, I'm not going to go toe-to-toe with them. I'm going to take one step to the side. Again, I'm perhaps going to have my hands up and show. I'm not a threat. The other advantage to this is if somebody ever did charge at you and you had your hands up like this, you could actually block and deflect them more easily than if your hands were somewhere else, occupied or busy. Again, those of you that might have things in your hands, whether it's pens, tools, smartphones, computers, whatever, that's something to consider. Where do I put that stuff? How do I put it down? How do I manage that? So these are all things that we can, again, I'm kind of Farmer Marty here, planting some seeds. One of you thinking about, what do you do? What can assist your practice? And is there anything specifically that can help you as a tool? We all seem to have smartphones these days. Can we videotape ourselves and see what we look like and sound like whenever we say that statement or make that question? Okay, so let me get into the heart of the subject matter here, which is what are the behavior situations that concern you the most? And when I was here a couple of days ago during introductions, it really was great. I went around with your colleagues and say, again, tell me what are the things you face at the front desk, out in the community. Again, if somebody went into the back areas. And I think consistently people were concerned about dealing with the agitated person. And we'll talk more about what agitation is, what it involves, and what can we do. I think all of us want to be physically safe. And so it feels very threatening when it's not physically safe. Also, dealing with the demanding individual can be really, really hard. And I'll give you some highlights and insights around that. And the other big one is whenever somebody is crossing a boundary. You're here to do your job, right? You got the LOTT logo on. You're trying to do the best you can with what you've got. And somebody seems to be getting into your stuff. They're asking perhaps personal questions, whether it's, where do you live? Are you on Facebook or Instagram? Kind of prying. And you're like, okay, I don't really want to give too much information, but I also don't want to trigger them more. How do you manage that? So this is all the things that we can consider, and hopefully we'll talk about more as well. When I have this discussion, I like to talk not just about physical safety, but the other forms of safety that are commonly put out there. A woman named Sandra Bloom, who's based out of New York, upstate New York, has a really nice model of care that I find is really, really useful. And she talks about not only physical safety, but also that psychological safety is really important for all of us. All of us want to be psychologically safe. We want to not be harmed. We don't want to be, again, judged. We don't want to be minimized in terms of our own emotions. And similarly, as groups, socially, we want to be supported. And I want you thinking about how do we support each other as coworkers whenever something difficult happens? Because even though it might seem like, oh, it's in a vacuum at the front desk, or it's in a vacuum out dealing with the public, it's not. It has the implications of everybody else. And the fourth form is moral safety. And I've had people ask me, Marty, can you explain moral safety? Because that's kind of a vague idea. And the best example I can give, and again, please note Sandra Bloom has a lot on her website that goes into detail around this, is I have witnessed people be floridly psychotic. And they seem to be in a different world than other people around them. And yet they're still not disconnected from their sense of values. I used to lead a group in the psychiatric hospital on values. And again, you see somebody who they're responding to the delusions and the hallucinations. They're talking to themselves. And somebody in the group will talk about respect, and that person will sit up straighter, kind of adjust their shirt. Even though they're in a different space, they're not completely disconnected from their core values. All of us have certain shared values. Everybody in this room wants to be treated with respect. Everybody in this room wants to be treated with dignity. Everybody in this room wants to be safe. So again, there's these certain moral, ethical, value elements that are part of our safety system as well. We just don't always think about it and talk about it. So I'll integrate some of those pieces into this discussion too. So when we're having this discussion, you're going to see me get into what's called the spectrum of escalation, this model I created a number of years ago, and it talks a lot about intervention. That said, a lot of what we do we're not intervening to concerns, but we're setting the table by engaging with people. So I like to highlight some differences between engagement and intervention, and you're going to see this a couple of times in the slides. So for the sake of this discussion, intervention is especially anything that's an advanced intervention is probably going to be a situation that's been unfolding and someone has called for a manager or a supervisor or again perhaps security to be on the scene. We don't expect you to go through this by yourself, especially again a situation that's unfolding. So who are your resources? Who are you getting for help? At the same time, frontline staff are encouraged to consider how best to engage with someone in an objective, neutral, non-threatening manner, in a way that aligns with reasonable customer service. And engaged staff often can help identify the concerning behavior situations early on due to their awareness and socialization. You see something in the video at the front desk of something happening in the parking lot. You see something, again, you're just doing your work and you're near the encampment, by Martin Way, and more than ever, people are coming out of there, and just something seems unusual. How do we communicate to our colleagues that are working there? Hey, just have your head up, acknowledge people, say hello to people, so that you've got your eyes on, your ears on, you've got your senses awake. So when we see this, engagement to me is really focused on being safe in those four forms, being predictable. We are often dealing with unpredictable situations, so what helps us be predictable amidst the unpredictability around us? And being caring and compassionate. Everybody knows the golden rule, right? Do unto others as you want done unto you. How do we maintain that even when a situation is unfolding in a dangerous way? It's hard. It is easier with practice, I can tell you this from my experience, and the experience I see with all of those professionals I talked about that I get to do work with. But it can be hard. So we want to apply this consistently to avoid bias, and how do we do that? So we'll talk about that and encourage you to expand this beyond even just the 2 hours, 2.5 hours we've got together here. For intervention, again, it's defined as to come between disputing people, groups, to mediate, or to occur or be between two things. Specifically, I want you to be careful. Some people will interpret intervention approaches as a threat. So how can we intervene without escalating a situation further or appearing as a threat to one or more entities during an intervention? And then again, we should want to apply this all as aligning with the safety factors we identified earlier and will expand upon. And again, you see on this slide, there's a couple of different things here. I really want to emphasize a couple of the engagement pieces. Again, part of it's just normal socialization, just your normal thing around initiating some sort of contact with others. Is it a smile? Is it a head nod? Whatever is your style. You see the be genuine and be real has 3 stars next to it. Because again, like I said, I've worked with a lot of people. When they're going through a crisis situation, they're saying they're working off a feel. And if it feels like you're not being genuine or being real, they're going to pick up on it. And that actually, they might kind of push your buttons more to see, are you genuinely kind or are you faking it? I use an example with every audience I teach, and I want to introduce it here. We work with the public. We've got to expect a mix of my 2 hands. One is saying, hey, you're part of the public, you can offer me something, what is it? I'm interested. But there's also the other hand. Who are you? Are you safe? A lot of the folks that we come in contact with that are having the hardest time, whether it's due to life conditions, mental health disorder, substance use or abuse issue, whatever it is, they've had dealings with the public that often get them very, very guarded. I look at Steve, who's as friendly as anything, right? Steve worked in the community for years, right? This is your second profession. I'm sure people, despite your friendly smile and your kindness, just because of the uniform, right, will give you this.
Yeah, you're automatically colored as a person of authority. So.
Exactly. And all of us are people in positions of authority. And you might think, nah, am I really? Am I in a position of authority at the front desk? Yeah, you got a badge. You're at the front desk, right? You might think, wait. In maintenance of facilities, am I in a position of authority? You're in a position of authority, right? Because again, for a lot of the folks that you're interacting with, they see you in an official role. So what do we do with that? How do we stay real? And how do we, again, keep things moving? So look at this. Again, just a simple little hello, a smile, a head nod. It's a great way to engage with someone. I encourage groups to think about the words that we say after hi. I came from a family who would not just say hi, they'd say to you, how are you? And while that seems like a nice thing, when people ask you that, do they really want to hear how you're doing? Most of the time, no, right? When you see somebody, whatever, the neighbor you haven't seen in a while because it's been winter, right? And like, oh, it's finally nice enough. Hey, howdy, neighbor, how are you? What do you usually say? Fine, right, I'm fine, I'm okay. Yeah, I'm okay, how are you? Oh, I'm okay, thanks, right? It's not a real conversation. Interestingly, again, when we work with people in crisis, if we ask them, how are you doing? They might just tell you, not good. Today's really bad. And you got to be ready, if you're going to ask that question, to listen to that answer. So sometimes I keep it simple with the hi, and I like to even focus it more than that. You notice the quote I've got up here. I ask people more, how's your day? How's your morning? Right? How's your day been going? Something like that. So it's more focused. And it's hopefully more of a real interaction. So again, we want to apply this to everyone. We should be, if we are engaging with one person this way, please engage with everyone this way. And again, you see some differences on the right-hand side relative to intervention. It's got a different form of socialization. It's really meant to manage a challenging situation. It should be applied equally to all, should be led by one voice. And I'll circle back to this at the end part of the presentation, but I really like to encourage this. If one person is engaging with the agitated individual, please let that person have that conversation. Let them take it. And if you want to add something, wait until there's usually that silence and that moment. Make eye contact with the other person, and then they'll usually ask for your opinion. Hey, Marty, you want to add something? And pardon me, and that's when you do. And again, the other thing is just we'll talk about things like follow-through after a situation has de-escalated. So we see some of these differences of engagement and intervention, but either way, they work towards preparedness. And I really like to emphasize, how do we prepare ourselves? So I'm going to focus on three areas: mentally and emotionally, verbally, as well as the physical and environmental preparedness that's part of our being safe. And we do this within the framework of the spectrum of escalation. So on the left-hand side here, you see prevention. We'd love to prevent problematic situations from arising. You cannot control everything that walks through your doors or that you come across in the community. So we can't prevent everything. I like to think of prevention and early intervention really as overlapping. We'd love to do early intervention if something is arising. Look at the color I put at the top here, red. I got a 7-year-old at home. She knew early on, don't put your hands by the burners of the stove when it's on red. You'll get burned. And I use this color intentionally because you'll hear me talk about when things are hot and like red hot. And as things get hotter, how do we adjust our approaches? What do we do in terms of adjusting our intervention, again, when we're past this early stage towards this more advanced stage? Right up here is where things are typically the most dangerous. This is where there's a lot of energy for everyone. Heightened energy, heightened adrenaline. That's why I asked you, where do you carry your stress and how do you carry your stress? Because hopefully we're tuned into what our body is telling us here. If we're not, we might be losing key cues about ourselves. At this really, really high point, it can go a couple of different ways. I do like to tell everybody that no one can stay agitated forever. What goes up must come down. And so eventually, through a combination of factors, usually our intervention, hopefully some time, and some other things on the side of the agitated person, the situation will come down. But just because it's come down doesn't mean it's over. Organizations that do the best around managing challenging situations don't just say, oh, it's done, and leave it there. They do some sort of follow through, and it's usually debriefing. And at the end of the presentation today, I'll talk about some of the keys around debriefing, what it is, what it isn't, and the 4 key questions to ask. When we debrief effectively, you see, you follow the dotted line back here, it leads us back to prevention. The purple lines indicate it could de-escalate at any point earlier. If it does go up to this really, really high point, we gotta be very, very careful about our approach and how we're addressing it. Do we have a plan? So I'm going to circle back and integrate the preparedness into prevention, early intervention, advanced intervention, as well as post-vention and post-intervention practices as well. So mentally and emotionally, you see a couple of things up here on the slide. First thing I want to think about is, where do I begin? Again, if somebody comes up to the front desk and they're loud and bizarre, I just need to use the bathroom. Can I use the bathroom back there? I know you got bathrooms. Right? Like, oh my goodness, right? You got a line of kids for a school field trip or whatever it's coming through here, right? You're trying to manage a couple of things. Oh, where do I begin? Whew, this is tough. What helps you organize as a situation is unfolding? I can't tell you how to predict what every situation is going to look like, but I want you thinking about, where do I start? Am I aware of my reactions? Again, when people are in crisis, they're often not listening very well. They hear very few words. Research indicates things like people only hear a small percentage of what's said. After about the first 5 words, they're not listening as much. They're picking up more off of things like body language, tone of voice. I'll talk about that in a moment as well. So how do we understand our reactions, and how do we do it within the framework of not taking things personally? That's hard. That is hard. Whenever, especially when someone can look at your badge and see your name, Elaine, you are not helping me. I really need to use that restroom, right? Oh my. It's hard not to take it personally when somebody's that close to you, looking you in the eye and saying your name. I can tell you this, though. I invite you to not take it personally. Do you think that this person, this is the first time they've ever raised their voice whenever they went up to Elaine and said, "You're not helping me"? No, right? And for many of the folks that I've worked with, I've found that that behavior is actually what we call adaptive behavior, that they've learned it. And they've learned it for the sake of adapting to the world around them. I work with a lot of people that have not just issues right now in March of 2020, but have a history of issues, whether it's within their life individually, whether within their family, within their community, maybe they're part of a larger marginalized group. There's all sorts of things that can add up to this cumulative situation that sees them at the front desk raising their voice, using your name, pounding on the table. I invite you to do what you can to not take it personal. It's hard. What helps you not take things personally? Everybody's got their different ways and approaches. For me, I got to remind myself, again, this is not the first time this person has probably yelled, sworn, made a threat. And again, it's probably for them, it's based upon adaptive reasons. This is behavior that they've learned, because this is what gets people's attention. When I raise my voice, when I bang the table, that's what gets people to respond to me. So how do I not feed into that, but how do I still potentially intervene? It's hard. So we're going to come back to this, and we're going to frame this also within, again, verbal preparedness. Words matter. What are the words I'm using? We're going to highlight some specific words I encourage you to use. But it's not just the words we use. Fundamentally, am I supporting people? If somebody feels like you're trying to shut them down right away, they might challenge you further. How do you support people? All of us. When we go through something difficult, we usually want support. When you're going through hard times, do you want other people's advice? Oftentimes, no. I don't know about you, but it's like a lot of times, like when I'm upset about something, I want my friends, my spouse to just be a good listener, right? And not try to fix it. So sometimes we can over-respond to situations. Do we understand what being supportive looks like, sounds like, and feels like. Again, think about it for yourself. Whenever you're going through something difficult, what do you most appreciate about receiving attention and the support of others? And the third thing at the bottom here is, what do I sound like? Words matter, but it's not just words. There are 3 parts of speech we don't talk about enough that are part of what we say. Tone of voice, volume, cadence, rhythm of speech, right? You all know your natural tone, volume, and cadence because you use it around the people that you really like and care about. When you're relaxed and you're with friends and you're with family, you know your normal rate of speech, normal tone, normal volume. When your buttons are being pushed and you hear one of those 3 elements changing, what do? Again, I invite you not to judge yourself and be mad at yourself, but do you hear it as a cue and clue? Oh, this person might be getting underneath my skin. What am I doing to approach this? You know, I say in our language, there is a 4-letter word, begins with the letter F. And based on how somebody says it, tone of voice, volume, cadence, it has completely different meanings. You know what word I'm talking about, right? Yeah, fine, right? Yeah, that was the word you were thinking of, right? I got to get some smiles and laughter out of all of you. Okay, good. Fine, right? Right? Again, you ask somebody, you know, how you doing? I'm fine, right? How you doing? Fine. My wife is a psychiatric social worker, okay? We have this thing, right? Like, honey, how was your day, right? And she comes home, fine. It's like, okay, I'm gonna give you a break. Yesterday was one of those days, right? She came home, I got home first. It was still sunny out, right? It's getting a little bit later with the sun. I was like, you wanna go for a little walk? She's like, yep. I'm like, okay, I got my daughter, that's fine. You go for a walk and walk it off a little bit, right? And she came back, and 30 minutes later, how you doing? I'm fine. Right? Tone of voice, same word. Tone, volume, cadence, and rhythm, completely different. Do we hear ourselves with what we put out there? And again, I want you integrating this relative to how you want to sound. All of us in this room have had situations in our life where we play it back afterwards because we're like, oh, I wish I had that one to do again. Because if I had to do it again, I know exactly what I'd say, how I'd say it. You know, you replay it. If you're like me, sometimes you replay it like for a few days. Like you're like, oh, I really want that one again. I had one a few weeks ago where it's like, oh, I wish I had that situation back. So how do we prepare ourselves to be even with our delivery? Not have significant changes in our volume, our tone. If I can give you one big one. In our world, when people get loud around us, most of us subconsciously get louder with them. And I invite you to not do that. When you got that person who's louder at the front desk, out wherever you're working. And again, it's hard sometimes, especially if you've been working with equipment, loud equipment, right, to not get loud too, because you know your ears are loud. What do you do to not go super quiet, but just go one notch down to really have that vocal control? Again, sometimes it takes practice. So we'll expand upon this. And the third element of preparedness is what you see here. Physical and environmental preparedness. Sometimes we want a really quiet environment. Sometimes a quiet environment can be to our detriment. What happens if somebody does get to a back office, randomly got through, you know, the security systems or got through the gate where you're working at? And that can feel unsafe. What do we do around letting other people know if I'm not safe? How do I move? What does my body language say whenever a situation is unfolding? I mean, again, people often are working off of feel, and if you're the type of person who's a pointer and you start pointing at people, that can send the wrong message, and that can escalate the situation further. And the other big one is personal bubble. Everybody's got a personal space and personal bubble. When we get into people's space, it could trigger them. I don't know about you, but when somebody gets into my space, it can impact me. So what do I do to make adjustments? What do I do to make adjustments that don't seem like a big deal? Or what if I really need to address it? This person is in my space and I'm stepping back. How do I communicate that? So we'll highlight these. So as we're having this discussion, I think one of the most important elements is to include a piece on mirror neurons. I talk a little bit about the science and specifically like the neurobiology of what goes on with difficult interactions. Mirror neurons, I think, are one of the most important things for us to understand, part of that subconscious process. And while it's nice to hear me talk, I think showing about 9.5 minutes of video will also be helpful. So let me cue this video up. And as I'm doing this, you see 2 points listed there. The top one just talks about that there's this neuron that mirrors the behavior of others as though the observer were acting. My thing that I really want to point out here is the second point. When facing a crisis situation, do you want to be led, consciously or subconsciously, by other people? Do you want to end up mirroring this other person in crisis? No, right? We usually want to get in front of this situation. So I got this video ready to go. Let me pop this up here. Okay. And this is from PBS Nova Science Now. And you see the video is about 14 minutes. We're going to focus on about the first 9.5 or so. The last 4 minutes are on some interesting theory around mirror neurons and autism. 2 things. One, it doesn't really relate to LOTT, so it's less important. And also the mirror neuron and autism theory is just that, it's theory. It's not been backed up. The rest, the part I'm showing you, the first 9.5 minutes is science. It's been backed up. And Robert Krulwich, who's the host of this show, he'll say, this is brand new science just out of the lab. Please know this video is like 13 years old. And I actually like it. Like I keep looking for better videos, but I actually like that it's 13 years old because it's been validated over those years. So again, feel free to watch. There's some funny parts. Feel free to laugh, enjoy yourself, and again, just feel free to relax and watch.
We humans are really good at reading faces and bodies, because if I can look at you and feel what you're feeling, I can learn from you, connect to you, I can love you. Empathy is one of our finer traits, and when it happens so easily, perhaps because, and this is brand new science, this is just out of the lab, we may have some special circuitry in our brains that helps us whenever we look at each other. Ask yourself, why do people get so involved, so deeply, deeply involved, with such anguish, such pain, such nail-biting tension over football?
Cleveland Browns are gambling on defense.
Why are we such suckers for sports? And it's not just sports. We can lose it completely at the movies, at video games, watching a dance. Is there something about humans particularly, that allows us to connect so deeply when we watch other people? Watch them moving, watch them playing, watch their faces. Well, as it happens, scientists have an explanation for this strange ability to connect. It's new.
It had never been found on the cellular level before.
A set of brain cells found on either side of the head. Among all the billions of long branching cells in our brain, these so-called mirror neurons have surprising power.
What we found is the mechanism that underlies something which is absolutely fundamental to the way that we see other people in the world.
And it began entirely by accident at a laboratory in the lovely old city of Parma, Italy, where a group of brain researchers was working with monkeys. And they were testing a neuron, that's a brain cell, that always made this sound whenever the monkey would grab for a peanut. So the lab had all these peanuts around, and whenever the monkey made its move, the neuron would fire. Scientists thought, now here's a neuron that is essential to motion. It's a motor neuron. Then one day the monkey was just sitting around, not moving at all, just sitting, when a human scientist came into the lab. And when that scientist grasped the peanut, the monkey's cell fired. Now, the monkey hadn't moved. It was the human that had moved, suggesting that this neuron up here couldn't tell the difference between seeing something and doing something. Seeing and doing were the same. Or more intriguingly, that for this neuron, watching somebody do something is just like doing it yourself. The head of the lab, Giacomo Deescelation, thought, wow.
The same neurons, one neuron, fire both when the monkey observes something and when monkey is doing something. It's almost unbelievable.
It was surprising because this cell which was involved with motor planning for the monkey turned out to be interested in the movements of other people as well.
Some people call them monkey see, monkey do neurons, but the name that stuck is mirror neurons because with them, the brain seems to mirror the movements it sees. This accidental discovery got scientists thinking, doing more tests, and it soon came pretty clear that this is not just a monkey thing, it's a people thing too. We all know that humans learn by looking and copying. That's what infants do. First you look, then you do.
Ready? Let's see your feet this way.
And once you've watched and copied and learned a set of moves, you not only have them in your head,
Look, you put your shoe on. Yeah, she brushed it.
if you see somebody else doing it, you can share the experience.
And you want to do it with me?
They know the moves, you know the moves, so you can move with them.
Wow.
If you can use the years of training that you yourself have done, learning to crawl, then learning to walk, then learning to eat, this is an incredibly rich set of knowledge that you could apply to the problem of actually seeing what's going on.
So that's why when I head down this street carrying all these packages, not only do people watch, look how they're watching. They feel my predicament because they know what it's like to carry heavy packages. They all know about carrying. So as they watch me moving, they can feel themselves moving. Their neurons are mirroring the action. These neurons may be the brain's way of translating what we see so we can relate to the world.
The mirror system is the way that you tap into, the way that you harness your own abilities and project them out into the world.
And people are really good at watching and translating what we see. Like with just 13 moving dots, that's all there are here, you'll have no trouble recognizing these very ordinary activities. What's more, tests have shown when a person sees a movie like this of his own movement, he'll recognize it immediately as his own. And that's why sports fans tense with the action and wince and leap, because if you know the game, then your neurons are firing as if it's you playing, giving a whole new meaning to the phrase armchair quarterback. That's why it's so easy to be a sports fan. But there is more, suggests UCLA professor Marco Iacoboni. He thinks mirror neurons tie us not just to other people's actions, but to other people's feelings.
So the idea was to try to figure out how the emotional system and this motor system are connected together. We're going to go in the scanner. What you're going to do is
To demonstrate, he put me into this very powerful fMRI brain scanner that can peer into the brain while it's working. And he gave me some goggles so he could show me pictures when I was in there.
So you can see here the eyeball of Robert.
And once he had a good view into my brain...
Nice looking brain.
Thank you.
Robert, you're not supposed to talk when we scan you, all right?
Sorry. Then he said, okay, I'm going to show you a bunch of faces. And for each face, I want you to imitate it. So I did that. Then he recorded my brain while I moved my facial muscles.
We're going to do right away another one.
Okay. Then he said, okay, same faces, but this time, don't move a muscle. Just look. So I looked. When we checked the results, oh, there's my brain. I've never seen my brain before.
This is your mirror area.
Iacoboni says that the part of my brain that's working when I make a face, the same part gets busy when I see the face. Plus, when I was looking at these faces, I remember feeling extra uncomfortable, kind of bad. But when these faces came on, I felt better, almost happy. And in fact, at the moment I was looking at the happy face, my brain, and this is my brain, in that instant, see the red area here? It shows activity in the happy emotional part of my brain. And when I was imitating happy faces, look, I get even a bigger response. This, says Jacoboni, is a consistent result. Mirror neurons, he believes, can send messages to the limbic or emotional system in our brains. So it's possible these neurons help us tune in to each other's feelings. That's empathy.
We strongly believe that that's a unifying mechanism that allows people to actually connect at a very simple level.
You're saying that there's a place in my brain whose job it is to live in other people's minds, live in other people's bodies.
That's right.
Oh, darling, I'm going to die. Don't let me die.
Yeah.
And great actors instinctively know that if they put feeling and drama into their bodies,
Hold me tight. Don't let me go.
their faces,
It's dark out there and home.
we will respond.
Die. You're too brave to die.
What actors are expert in is using their movements to inspire feelings in the people watching. These are the experts in the mirror system.
We are intensely social creatures. We literally read other people's minds. I don't mean anything psychic like telepathy, but you can adopt another person's point of view.
A different direction around autism theory, but I think we get a pretty good sense of what's going on with this whole mirror neuron theory. And as I said, again, this is on YouTube, PBS Nova, very, very easy to find. So let me come back to these slides here. Let me do this. Okay, there it goes. So again, we typically want to be really careful to not lose our own awareness into who we are, what we're doing, what our hope and goal is relative to an interaction whenever it seems unsafe, unpredictable, potentially dangerous. And I gotta make sure it doesn't, okay, there we go. So you'll see that as I'm going through this discussion, I want you thinking about yourself and how might you best respond to situations in a way that has you being in as much of your own personal control as possible. And because you're working with other people, how do you communicate with each other to be able to manage this effectively? Well, the first thing that most of us don't give any thought to is our own self-care. So I like to shine a light on self-care. So I'm gonna pause for a moment. Everybody has good days, everybody has bad days. I don't know about you, but there's times whenever it's like, oh gosh, I would love to not have to deal with the public today, and I'd rather just kind of stay in and keep to myself. But the reality is there's a lot of times when we have to keep showing up regardless of not feeling like we're at our best selves. What do you do every day to help you reframe, refocus on what's most important? And again, having worked in psychiatric situations, I would see a lot of interesting behavior that would usually happen at the beginning of people's shift, or usually right before their shift started, usually towards the end of their shift, and hopefully in the middle. So the hospital I worked at the most, I worked up at Harborview in Seattle, but specifically I worked at this small community hospital that had 70 beds. And first floor was where staff entered, and there was elevators to get up to the second floor where there was 35 patient beds, and to a third floor where there was 35 more patient beds. And before people would key the elevator, right, just like you got to key the fobs to get through the doors here, right, I'd see all sorts of interesting behavior right before a shift would start. I'd see prayer, meditation, like people hold on to like rosary beads, like all sorts of interesting things, like because they know the moment they get off of that elevator on the second or third floor with 35 psychiatric patients, it's potentially unpredictable, right? That actually, staff would tell me, that actually makes it easier. Like knowing I have to key the elevator and then I get up there, right? You don't have that same advantage. You're just coming to work, right? You're like, I'm just trying to have another day at the job. So what do you do as an individual and potentially as a group to help shine a light on doing some self-care practice? Now, I can give some ideas, and I'm going to circle back to a couple of things here in just a few moments, actually. But I want to give one example, and I'm not asking for people to raise their hand. Who brushed their teeth this morning, right? Hopefully all of us, right? If you didn't, don't tell us. You don't think of that as self-care because you've been trained. right? You learned as a kid, you probably had parents, mentors, and the American Dental Association reinforce to you how excellent it is to brush your teeth, right? And most of us don't go to, 3 times a day. I do it once in the morning and once in the evening. The idea of a third time, it's hard to get it in there, right? But even twice a day will help you keep your dental maintenance. What do we do that helps us come back to ourselves? Do we do a self-care practice 2 to 3 times a day? Once early, I think the big one is in the middle of our difficult days, and at the end, that helps you come back to yourself. And again, before we got the video rolling, I said this to the group, and I think it's worth reiterating now. The hardest thing is whenever you feel like you're separated from yourself. And in our world, as adults, we have a lot of stress. And there's a lot of things that pull us. And there's a lot of things that pull us away from ourselves, away from our core values, the kind of that center through line of what helps us have common sense and to work collaboratively with others, even when sometimes we don't feel like it, or it might not be that easy because of the circumstances around us. What helps bring you back to you? That's a bigger question than I can answer in this couple of hours of training, but this is part of it. And notice, again, it's not just an individual thing, but what do we do as groups and teams? The teams that have some sort of activities that bring you together are the teams that work better. It gets you out of our silos, right? Something like this is nice. Again, getting to see people from different departments so that you know, because if something difficult, if something, quote, bad goes down here at LOTT, we want to have each other's backs. And it takes getting to know each other and supporting each other and talking about these sorts of key things. How are we going to respond to situations that can help with this? Now, I don't expect you to necessarily do something as a team every day, but can we do something as a team weekly or even monthly, right? Some predictability, some frequency sure does help. And again, regardless of the group I work with, educators, healthcare, law enforcement, heck, they just had the Senate session, I think one of the only bills that passed unanimously was one around police officer and law enforcement wellness programs and their health and well-being. It was the one thing that, again, just passed right through with no objections. So we see that this is really valuable for anybody that's dealing with the public. What do we do at LOTT to be proactive and, again, preventative if possible? So think about this. And I mentioned earlier on in one of the slides, and we kind of heard it talked about a little bit in the video, although they didn't use the word threat alarms, right? There's this thing called the amygdala. And the amygdala is the one part of the brain that, other than these mirror neurons that I'm going to highlight. The amygdala is this really old part of the brain. It's super small. It's like the size of a nut, a peanut, walnut. It's really tiny, yet it's really important. 250 million years ago, they believe that this part of the brain really came to fruition whenever humans were not the top of the food chain. 250 million years ago, our ancestors, and all of us had ancestors back at that time, lived in vastly different circumstances. They didn't have indoor plumbing, they sure as heck didn't have heat or hot water, right? Every day, they came out of their cave or hut, because our ancestors lived in caves and huts at some point, so, surviving, again, adapting to the surroundings. And every day they emerged and they didn't know what they were facing. They didn't have weather forecasts. They didn't know what was going on. And again, they weren't at the top of the food chain. So if a bear or a tiger was the first thing that they saw in the morning, and the bear made eye contact or the tiger makes eye contact, at this point, we want to believe that the smart parts of our brain kick in, but that's not what happens. The blood and the messaging, the neurons that connect, don't actually go to the top part of our brain, this cortex. It goes to this middle part of the brain called the limbic system, the amygdala, and it is responsible for fight, flight, or freeze. And again, in 2020, the threats might not be the same. We're not waking up and worried about bears and tigers and stuff like that, but this part of the brain's still in us. Let me give you an example. If we heard a big, and I'm talking about a big boom, out that window, what would you do? Are you the type of person who goes towards the window? What's going on out there? What the heck? Right? Are you the type of person who goes, I hear a boom that way, I'm going that way? Or you're the type of person who goes, I'm just going to stay right here. We still have a little more time. You say there's going to be a break soon, right? Like, that's fight, flight, or freeze. Fight doesn't need to be this. If you're the type of person who moves towards it, that's fight. And again, I want you to know yourselves. If you're the type of person who moves towards it, know that. Nothing wrong with that, nothing bad about that, but just know that. Because you might find that you're into it then. I like to also add, this can change. As a younger person, I was definitely running towards it. Once I became a parent, I started doing more of the fleeing because now I'm responsible for a child, right? So we don't have to be stuck on this. But again, it's really important to point out that we like to believe that whenever we're threatened, terrorized, put in harm's way, that the smart part of our brain is going to kick in. It doesn't work like that. This amygdala kicks in instead. So my question to you is, what helps you maintain composure? When your amygdala gets activated, your brain and body wants to go fast. It wants to get away from the threat. But we have to do something counterintuitive. We actually want to slow ourselves down. We want to become more aware. We want to become more aware of what we're saying, what we're doing physically, what our environment around us has in terms of support, in terms of dangers, all of that. So my question to all of you is, what helps you stay focused? What helps you stay in control of yourself? So I'm going to ask us all to just do a simple little exercise. With yourself seated in your chair, I'm going to ask you to put both feet flat on the ground and your back all the way in the chair. Now, I'm going to ask everybody to do something that's probably not completely natural. Turn your palms up and put them on your legs, on your lap, right? Is this how you sit? Now. Right? But again, sometimes a little shift and adjustment like this can help. Palms up is a non-threatening physical position, so that's also why I like to include this. With your back all the way in the chair, I want your head to be perched on your neck and shoulders nice and straight. You can have your eyes open or eyes closed, it doesn't matter to me, but I just want you in this position to take a breath in through your nose, hold it for just a moment, and when you are ready, exhale through your mouth. Second time, please breathe in through your nose. Hold it for a moment, and when you're ready, exhale through your mouth. One more time, please. In through the nose, hold it, and just with a little bit more force, just a little bit, exhale through your mouth a little stronger. Now, as you breathe in normally, in through your nose, and out through your mouth, I just want you to be aware of any stress you have in your body. I'm going to point out some areas from the top of our head down to the tips of our toes. And as I'm talking about them, become aware of that area as you breathe in. And if you feel any tension, as you exhale out through your mouth, try to release that tension as well from that area. Do you have any tension at the top of your head? Maybe you experience headaches regularly or you have one today. That's where you're carrying tension. Be aware of it as you breathe in, release it as you breathe out. What about through your face? I mentioned earlier, many of us carry tension in our jaw or your neck. If you have tension in your face, jaw, neck, be aware of it as you breathe in and release it as you breathe out. From your neck, go down to your shoulders. Many of us carry tension in our shoulders, in our upper back. Be aware of it as you breathe in and release it as you breathe out. From your shoulders, go down your arms for a moment. Go down your biceps, triceps, past your elbows and wrists, down to your fingertips. A lot of us carry tension in our joint areas and other muscle areas. Be aware of it as you breathe in and release it as you breathe out. Come back to your shoulders and let's just go down our chest and our back. Again, from our chest, front of us, our chest and our gut can carry stress. And our back, we definitely carry stress in our upper back, mid back, lower back. Anywhere there, your upper torso where you're carrying stress, be aware of it as you breathe in and release it as you breathe out. Now go down to the lower half of your body. Maybe your hips, go down past your hips to your knees, down all the way through your legs to your ankles to the tips of your toes. Any tension or stress you have in those lower parts of your body, be aware of it as you breathe in and release it as you breathe out. Again, allow yourself to do another physical inventory. Anywhere you're carrying stress, breathe in, be aware of it, and release it on the exhale out. The last 3 breaths I'll have you do involve a visualization. I want you, before you get the breathing going, to think about somebody, something, somewhere that's important to you, meaningful to you. Perhaps there's a person that you love, or a place that you love to go, or something that you enjoy doing. Maybe it's a pet that you have that's meaningful to you. I want you thinking of this person, place, thing, or animal as you breathe in through your nose. Let it fill up your lungs, and then exhale out when you're ready, releasing any stress with it. A second breath, please. In through your nose, visualizing this person, place, thing, or animal. Breathe in. Hold it, and when you're ready, exhale through your mouth. One last time. Thinking of this person, place, thing, or animal. Breathe in through your nose. Hold it for a moment, and when you are ready, breathe out through your mouth. Now I invite you to just kind of shake your body out. If you need to stand up to do it, feel free to go for it. If you want to do it seated, you're welcome to do so. My question to you is, after doing some breaths, whether it's 3 breaths, a minute of breathing, or 2 minutes of breathing, most of these exercises I do are somewhere in the 2 to 3 minute mark. Do you feel a little bit less stress? Again, one of these, one practice isn't going to change you. But again, it's like the brushing the teeth example. If you do it cumulatively enough, a minute here, 2 minutes there, it adds up. My request of you, and again, we're all adults. I'm not going to tell you to do this. This isn't like homework. My request of you is during your day, for a minute at the beginning of your day, a minute or 2 at the middle of your day, and a minute or 2 at the end, what do you do that helps you shift? Because again, I think for many of us, there's multiple things going on. One is we're doing what we can to take care of ourselves. Number 2, we're part of an organization, so we're doing what we can to be a team worker. And then also, we want to leave here intact. And we want to carry our stress home to our family and our loved ones, right? So that when we get home, they ask us, how you doing? And you go, fine, right? It's like, what do you do to help get that stress off before you take it home? Again, so this isn't just about de-escalation. This is about our well-being. And as I mentioned, Senate passed bill around law enforcement and others doing what they can to understand and manage their stress. So what helps you? We see 3 examples on the bottom of this slide. You'll see this slide one other time. We just practiced taking a breath. Me, the second one that's below that is really relevant for me. You all get that I'm high energy. Hopefully that keeps it interesting for the sake of this presentation. But there's times whenever I almost talk too much. And so when I'm working with a client, sometimes I got to like push my tongue to the roof of my mouth and get quiet and go, and just be a good listener. What do you do that helps you stay in control of yourself? The other one I like is summarizing. So if somebody says something to you, I want to summarize back to them what I heard. And you'll see that again as well. Okay. So we're doing what we can to maintain composure. Pardon me, this is freezing up on me. We're almost at break here. We're doing what we can to maintain composure. And we are doing this, here we go, within the understanding of I want to have my radar on as early as possible. Physical space makes a difference. Do you understand physically what's going on for you? If you're understanding, preparing, and practicing responses for managing situations, you're more likely to be effective. There's a quote here in gold at the bottom. This is one you don't hear many people saying when somebody else gets into someone else's space. I ride the bus in Seattle, right? Metro. You don't hear people when one person bumps into somebody else on the Metro bus that I'm stepping back, can you step back too, right? It usually sounds a lot different. It involves finger pointing and usually some curse words, right? But again, as professionals, we want to take the high road. So what are we saying? What are we planning and preparing so that we indicate I'm not a threat, right? And again, part of it's verbal, part of it's nonverbal. A lot of times, as I'm moving away, my hands are up. So what do we do to help make this easier and model it and mirror it so people are more likely to respond to us in a way that's effective? And as we're doing this, what are we doing to let other people know we need help? So you see 3 things here. Are there other staff available to help? And if so, are we getting them? What words are we using to ask for help? A couple of the organizations that I work with, they use that red hot example. It's getting hot at the front desk. It's getting hot at the parking lot. It's getting hot over by our work site, right? How hot, sometimes they'll say. Bright red, light red. What is it? I got one group that's like, they got a range of pinks to reds. I'm like, that's fine. Whatever it is that helps everybody be on the same page to communicate this. And the other big one that's really valuable is, can the agitated person and I move somewhere safer? Two of the most important de-escalation words I've got in my tool belt are these: follow me. You don't want the person staying at the front desk in an area that's high profile, right? So follow me. Talk to me over here. Now, again, you want to be careful. You don't want to go to a spot where nobody else knows where you're at, where nobody can see you, but you want to go to a safe spot. Where would you direct that person to? If something happens out in the parking lot and security has to provide direction, where do they want to direct somebody to? If somebody gets past the gate at your work site, where do you want to direct them to? And based on my experience, again, doing tens of thousand hours in psychiatric situations where people are not happy with me and other people and they're agitated, I find that when I say follow me, one of two things happens. One is they follow me because they want to keep talking and they're pissed off, right? So they're going to keep talking and they'll follow me wherever I lead them to. The other one is they'll do this: I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to stay right here. Okay, you stay right there. We'll move everybody else. Right? Sometimes we have to move the bystanders because that can be easier than trying to move this one agitated individual and feeling like you're getting into an argument about it. Eventually, this person will move. They weren't born there. They don't have concrete in their shoes. They will eventually move. What's interesting is perhaps they'll move when there's not an audience. So we're going to, we can expand upon this. The other one that I wanted to introduce before we go to break is this slide specifically on setting expectations. I'll just kind of show you. We're going to get into intervention when we come back from break. We're going to talk about some very specifics around verbal skills, listening skills, word choices, etc. But I wanted to highlight that this is the one that many of us, we forget about because we get into our jobs and we're used to doing our jobs at our locations. Many of you have been doing your work for years and you're comfortable in your position. It's like second home. What's tough is we don't always know what the other person is thinking and what their expectations are too. So when we're interacting with somebody, again, early intervention, are we doing what we can to discuss expectations? What do people expect of us in my role and my capacity? Again, if I really, really want to use the restroom, right? And you're like, I'm sorry, I can't let you in to use the restroom. There's a porta potty over there. If it's during the summer, I understand there's other bathrooms closer by that get opened up. Can we provide resources to someone? Let them know what to expect. Provide help, right? Think about this with anybody, right? When you want something and somebody has to say to you, I can't provide it, then give me something else. Where can I get it? How do I get it? Who do I talk to? Help connect me. And again, for us, we're also trying to let people know what we expect. And so when I was here on Tuesday, the bathroom thing came up. And I one of the examples was like, maybe we kind of make a little card that, like a little laminated 3x5 card that lets people know, we're not trying to limit the bathrooms. Yet we have to have some limits because we've had some issues around loss and damage in bathrooms, so that you make it less personal. It's not just one person saying to me, can't use the bathroom. But this is the LOTT way of being, okay? So we're going to go to break now. And again, when we come back, we're going to talk about intervention. We've planted some seeds so that we can think about, how do I adjust? How do I set expectations for myself and for others? And the next step is, how do I put it into place? And we'll talk about some slides, and we'll also do one activity that should not be stressful. Feel free to finish up if you want to do elbow bumps with your colleagues and make peace in our time of virus transmission. We're all finding fun ways, saluting, bowing, elbow bumps, acknowledgments, virtual handshake, all of that. So video crew, you're welcome to get restarted. And I understand too, I'll just say this, if folks are like, I don't really want to talk on the video, that's fine. But it is for just internal training purposes, that's all. So it's nice to hear from you. I saw a lot of smiles, a lot of laughter, so it looked like there was de-escalation that was going on. When you were in the role of being the person who was upset, what did you most appreciate about the response you got from this other person? Who would like to offer up one or two things? Yes?
I appreciated Wendy's eye contact and empathetic acknowledgement.
Yeah. Okay, so there's three big things in there. Some eye contact, right? And I understand if you're like, have you ever been stared at by somebody whose eye contact is just a little too intense, right? That throws me off. Some of us are like, no, right? And some of us don't have that experience, and others are like, oh, I've had that experience, right? I tell people, I'm like, I understand if you only want a little bit of eye contact. I often work around a person's face. I'll go eyes to nose, back to eyes, down to chin, up to hairline, back down to eyes. So like whatever is comfortable for you. So you said eye contact. There was validation in there. And there was one other thing you said.
Offering resources.
Offering of resources. What can we offer this person, right? And this, again, this is useful not only at work, but in life. How do we learn to help frame the conversation, ask questions to lead people towards what they want, as opposed to just being focused on what they can't get, right? Because otherwise you'll just keep spinning, right? So how do we move towards resources? What's available to them, right? People want to be heard. We want to be helped. That's fundamentally supported. Nice. Who else? What did you, yes?
I appreciated Robin's calmness.
Yes. It's subtle, right? But it has a huge impact. When somebody else is calm, it serves as a mirror, right? If they're not calm, if they're freaking out, oh my goodness, this is horrible. This is a catastrophe, right? It's just gonna make things worse. And when you're calm, cool, and collected, when you sometimes say less as opposed to more, again, those short sentences, few syllables, it helps the person hear themselves. Sometimes, hopefully if the person's in their right mind, they'll even catch themselves. Oh, I might be catastrophizing this, right? Or something like that. So there's something to be said for modeling that consistency and that composure. Again, with single head nods, the mm-hms. What are your part of your diffusers or transitional statements like that, right? A big one for me is, that's interesting. Tell me more, right? Because maybe I don't, interesting can mean a few different things, right? Might also mean bizarre, but that's okay. Get the person talking. Nice. What else? What else did you appreciate about the interaction from this other person? What did they do? What did they say? How did they approach it?
I'd say more like concerned.
Yeah, they're concerned. Yeah, and again, when we get upset, it means something to us. And so when somebody gives us the space to be upset and they don't minimize it, they don't ignore it, or again, they don't catastrophize it too on the other side. They don't over-respond nor under-respond. It feels better. Nice. Anything else? What else did you appreciate? Yes.
I liked that mine couldn't be solved right away, so I was really frustrated.
Yes.
But she was writing down my info and was going to get back to me.
Yes. Okay, so whether it's getting resources, following up with people, 3 potential pitfalls I see people walk through in situations is they go straight to problem solver, right? And a lot of times, like the example you just gave, you can't solve their problem right away. Their issue might go back years, and you're just right here in this moment with them. So careful going straight to problem solver mode, right? There's a phrase, I hear it used more with kids, but I think it can be used with a lot of people. Connect before correct. How do you make that connection first before correcting? And again, for those of you that are parents, very useful. When you want to go into straight to correction mode, connect with your child first, right? Understand what's going on, then provide that correction once they've calmed down. If we go back to that spectrum of escalation we saw, everything in the red is not when people are open to change. Those aren't the opportunities for teachable moments. The teachable moments happen at the beginning or at the end. I see a lot of teachable moments happen actually at the end, during debriefings and things like that, but not when things are hot. Another potential pitfall, just because it's coming up, is the use of humor, right? Many of us have really great senses of humor, right? And most of us like a good comedian, right? But you also know when a comedian can fail. Timing is one of them, right? And if somebody's hot and you're using humor, it might fall flat. The other thing is usually the relationship. If you have a previous relationship with somebody and they know you joke, you're more likely to have that humor be successful. But if they don't know that you have that part of you, and this is your first or one of your few interactions with them, it's more likely to fall flat too. So careful around humor, problem solving, and the third one is giving advice. I don't know if you've experienced this, but giving advice is kind of a double-edged sword. One is the obvious one, which if you give somebody advice and you're wrong, now they got somebody to blame, right? But even if you give advice to somebody and you're right, it's not empowering them. They'll be like, of course, Steve knows this stuff. He's been through this before. Of course he has the answer. Stupid me doesn't have the answer, right? So how do we manage those potential pitfalls, right? Because we want to be careful navigating this. Okay. Anything else, what it was like for you on the side of being upset that you appreciated from the care that you got from others?
The statement that my problem could not be corrected easily. So candor.
Right, candor, honesty, right? And picking the way you deliver that. I appreciated on Tuesday, we had a similar example. And the person was like, gosh, they kind of did this like transitional thing. They kind of like set up their candor. Like, oh gosh, it's tough for me to say, but I got to be honest, right? Pause, and then they were candid, So like, how do you be candid and have candor without being brutally honest? Can we take the brutality out of it, and just be honest? So nice. Let me ask then the other role. When you were just being yourself, and you're dealing with somebody, again, who's not a threat, but who's playing the role of an agitated person, did you notice anything about yourself? Did you notice anything about yourself physically? Again, like, did you notice any stress response? Did you notice any discomfort? Anything from your experience? Yes?
I had a little bit of panic. I was like, oh my God, how am I going to solve this?
Right. Because again, we want to help, right? So we have an emotional reaction too. It doesn't happen in a bubble, right? We're human beings, and they said it in the video, and it's worth repeating. We are social beings. I really appreciated your word too, empathy, right? We want empathy, and empathy is different than sympathy. So this is usually the point of the discussion when I bring this up, right? What's the difference between empathy and sympathy? Because when we get that emotional reaction, we might show sympathy, right? But sympathy has a slightly different thing. Sympathy, from working with again, people in crisis, I've had them tell me it feels like pity, and I don't want pity. I want empathy. I want somebody who attempts to understand my perspective, see things from my viewpoint. The old Native American proverb, to walk a mile in someone else's moccasin, to try to understand it from their experience. How do you do that? Well, again, it usually takes being a good listener and just being like, wow, that sounds hard. Again, how do we validate? How do we offer resources, choices, support for people? And it's okay to be honest and be like, wow, I don't know if I know what can help, but it sounds really awful. It sounds really scary. Do you need something that's going to help keep you safe right now? I always fall back when I don't know what to say. I talk about safety. What's going to help keep us safe right now? What might you benefit from right now relative to safety? I'm going to frame this in a little bit around the 911 call too. If I have to call 911, how do I do this in a way that doesn't trigger people? People will have a potential reaction to the 911 call that's more of a threat. So how do we do it in a way that is non-threatening? Anything else from the role of you when you're just being yourself that you noticed about your own stress response when dealing with this other person?
Sort of gesturing with my hands more.
Yeah, right? You start, okay, right? There's this. And that can be really useful, but it also can be confusing, right? Like, I'm a hand person. Pardon me, I'm a physical person. I'm a drummer, right? So there's a lot, as you see, I move around a lot. I have to learn how to manage that. That's why I had us do an exercise. If you're the same type of person as me, what helps you to, where do you put your hands? For me, when in doubt, I cross them like this. Because I used to put them on my hips, right? But then that comes off as confrontational, right? Or if I'm like this, now I look closed off. So what do I do with my hands? And you saw some examples before. Sometimes I'm putting it up like this, vastly different than like this, right? Those little things make a difference. Heck, Adjusting your body language. So again, you're not toed up with somebody, but you adjust your body posture so you look more relaxed. Those little things make a difference. And it's not only for them, it's for you. Anything else that you want to highlight from either role in this example?
Mine was my heart rate just started climbing and confusion of, okay, what's the best tech to take care of?
So we saw that example of naming behavior. Can you name the behavior for you too? Especially when it came out of nowhere. Whoa! Wasn't expecting you. Like the folks that come out from the homeless encampment by Martin, right? Oh, wasn't expecting you. Whoa! Right? Just be honest with it. Name it. Right? Person's having a hard time at the front desk. How do you name it? Wow, yeah, that's stressful. I feel it here too. Right? Gosh, let's both figure this out. Follow me. Again, there's that follow me, right? I want to lead them to where I want them to go. Where is it? If you feel like you're the only person having that conversation uncomfortably by an area near Martin Way that nobody else in your coworkers can see you, you want to start moving so that your coworkers can see you, because Steve's expecting you, right? So I want to get closer. So, I'm talking to this person, but I got to let them know, hey, I'm just moving this way a little bit. You can follow me if you want, but my coworker, my buddy Steve over here is looking for me too, so I want to make sure he can see me. And that way you're just kind of talking your way through it. And the more you talk your way through it, the more you're normalizing it. And then people's stress levels start dropping. Again, it's hard. We think we want to go fast through the situation, go slow. I can tell you from doing so many crisis interventions and debriefings of crisis interventions, the ones that went the worst were when people went through too fast. Again, we want to get that monkey off of our back and off of our shoulders. We want to get it done. But if we don't go through all the way, we'll have to deal with the issues later. Because as I'll show here, a lot of what we're doing is managing action and reaction. Okay. And if you face a difficult situation, you might need to document this. And I like to introduce this after we did a little activity, because now you understand action and reaction. What did the other person initiate in terms of action? And how are you reacting? And do we include that in a documentation note? And the hardest documentation, it's hard to document whenever a tool fails or something didn't go as planned, but it's even harder when you're trying to document behavior. 3 important letters are up here, AEB, as evidenced by. Let me give you an example. The person came through the door, or the person came up from their chair. They started pounding their fist into their other hand, and they started yelling loudly, "If you don't get me help now, I'll show you what I can do." They got so close, I could feel their breath on my face. I won't breathe on anybody's face, I promise. I have coffee breath. Those sorts of examples are descriptive. They're not judgmental. They're describing the behavior. AEB. When people tell me, "Oh, Marty, I got surprised. So-and-so was agitated. They were hostile. They were threatening." I go, that's a great start. As evidenced by what? "Oh, man, they were posturing, puffing up their shoulders, pointing, yelling, swearing, saying all these rude, vulgar statements, making biased statements, discriminatory statements, all those things." Wow. Now you painted the picture. That's more than just agitation, right? You're really helping me understand what's going on. Then I'll ask follow-up questions. What'd you do next? Action, reaction. Did you feel threatened? What'd you do to move towards safety? Right? So it helps with documentation, but it also helps us kind of think about how we're walking through. Pardon me, I think it froze. Oh, I think I turned it off. That's what I did. Okay, so in terms of advanced intervention notes, as a situation is really, really getting hot, we've got to be developing a plan. If there is a plan already in place because we've had some frequent issues, maybe you've identified, again, at our work location, maybe we need one person to be the set of eyes because people keep coming in through the gate. And until we can get this figured out, we have to have a different approach. Sometimes we're going to have a plan A, sometimes we're going to have a plan B, and we definitely want to be using a team approach. Specifically, when you're developing a plan, hopefully you're not doing it by yourself, and we're getting other people to collaborate. That said, when we're implementing a plan, please use one voice, talking to the agitated individual. Multiple voices will create more confusion, and more confusion leads to problematic outcomes. We want things as clear as possible. So if we have to Set limits. I just want to pop up all these for the sake of time and for the sake of the video. There are 3 fundamental questions around setting limits. Everything up to this point in this discussion has been about being supportive, supportive, supportive. But setting limits is directive. And you see here, it comes in the second part here. While you're setting a limit, and that's fundamentally directive in nature, can we still be supportive and offer empathy to people? So we got to ask ourselves, is the limit we're setting fair? Would we set the same limit for somebody else? Is there a bias present in this situation? What would other people think, that the limit is fair or not fair? And it's pretty similar when it comes to reasonability, as I just read to you. And the other big one for me, and I wasn't as good at this when I first started in the field, and I've gotten better, is around achievability. Because not everybody's the same. Not everybody's the same cognitively, not everybody's the same physically, not everybody's the same psychologically. So considering that, what's reasonable for this person? Again, I think of the situations I've heard from your staff, whether it's the parking lot, the front desk area. Maybe the most reasonable outcome first is just getting that person away from the front desk area and still allowing them to vent somewhere else, but just not so it's impacting the other groups. The youth group we've seen here, the other people, right? How do we give them an opportunity to vent? That's fair and reasonable, and that can be achievable too. I always say, I ask the questions about 3 people. What would 3 people think? If I had to set limits in a situation, what do 3 people think about this situation? The 3 people include these. First one is, if that agitated person had an advocate and they were watching the situation unfold, would they agree that I set a limit and it was fair, reasonable, and achievable? I should feel pretty confident about it. The second one was always my supervisor. If my supervisor watched me in this situation unfold from beginning to end and I set a limit and my supervisor agreed it was fair, reasonable, and achievable, feel good about it. The third person for me has always been my mother. If my mom was watching the situation from beginning to end, would she agree that I was being fair, reasonable, and achievable? And if I wasn't, she'd call me on it. They touched your face, didn't they, Marty? Like something like that, right? And so again, because we all have triggers, we all have buttons. Do you know yours? Right? Because any one of us can make even a well-meaning mistake. So what helps us? Be more grounded and work more collaboratively. Again, this gets easier the more and more we do it, and it gets easier the more and more we talk about it. So feel free, if you have repetitive situations coming up, again, at a work site, at the front desk, in the parking lot, what are we doing so that we're consistent around our setting limits and it's not arbitrary, so that people aren't pointing out, you said something different than your coworker did. You don't want to have that conflict, right? So we want that consistency. Again, physically, we got to understand our amygdala is activated. We don't want to fight back. Fleeing is completely okay as long as you're not leaving somebody else in a vulnerable spot. Freezing can be really dangerous too. So my question to you is, what can you do to avoid, evade, or non-violently respond in the safest manner possible given the situation? And again, this is a 2.5 hour training, 2:15 with the break. And I'm not going into extensive nonviolent physical defense and de-escalation, but please know there's whole curriculum around this as well. And if there was ever situations that you felt like you wanted more of that training for LOTT, please know that I can provide that, and that is available as well. To conclude us, I just want to kind of bring up 2 key points. One is, in terms of advanced intervention, don't forget, we really want to get help from people, especially if a situation involves multiple agitated people. If you've got multiple people, it's going to be best to have separation, okay? If you've got 2 people who came in conflict, right? And Steve and I are communicating, and Steve gives me the look like, okay, I'll take him, we'll go this way. You chat with her over here, and we'll meet back in 5 or 10 minutes. That's usually the best way to go. It is hard whenever you're trying to create separation for multiple parties. It's best to work together as a team and then bring people back together once it's calmed down. If physical safety is a risk, please do call 911. And as you see, it says, see the next slide, because there's a few things on here. Please, when physical safety is a risk, call for help. Calling 911 is what we want to do. But as I mentioned already, please know that calling 911, even the statement, I'm calling 911, can escalate a situation. There's definitely, people have very negative views of law enforcement. Not everybody. Again, Steve can attest to this based upon previous experience. People already have a biased opinion about the law enforcement experience. And then, let's face it, there's elements of social norms and implicit bias during law enforcement interactions that have added to that. You call 911 on me. I'm a Caucasian male. The chance of violence is very, very low. You call 911 on someone who looks like me but has darker skin, the chance of violence statistically is greater. We got to understand those impacts. So what are we doing? How could we approach a situation where talking about the 911 call in a non-threatening manner can actually help lead to the de-escalation of a situation? I've witnessed this. I've been in debrief in these situations. One amazing one was the person was saying right up front, you're scaring me. And I think I need to call 911. But I know you don't want me to call 911, and I know I don't want to call 911. But if this situation doesn't subside, I got to call 911. And it was a female who was saying this. And when she said that, just saying that, just putting words to, I don't want to call 911, you don't want me to call 911, it helped lead to de-escalation. If you have to call 911, my request to you is when you get on the phone with the dispatcher, ask for CIT officers, crisis intervention trained officers. These are the folks, and specifically in Olympia, it's the CRU, CRU, Crisis Response Unit. 911 dispatcher gets on the phone with you, says police, fire, or medical. You might think, well, we had the mental health guy. Is it medical? It's not. You do want police. But again, you want police that have this additional training in crisis response. So you help them out, you help the dispatcher and the situation out by right on the phone call saying, I need law enforcement, but I want CIT trained. And again, if you're right here in the city, it's the CRU, the CRU. Again, just put that into the call, and it immediately shifts the training, and the training kicks in. It shifts the expectation of how they're going to respond to the call, and it hopefully can lead to a positive outcome. Please know that I happen to sit on the Washington State Criminal Justice Training CIT Advisory Board. This is really important to me. If you ever have any questions, please feel free to use me as a resource. The last things to consider in our last minutes together is really post-intervention practices. Even after a situation is over, it's not completely over. And again, I gave one example earlier. Sometimes we'll replay it in our brain. Well, it's more than just that. There's actual literally cortisol and norepinephrine still pumping on our brains and our bodies after a situation. So it's important to make sense of what happened and to communicate and strengthen the team moving forward. So we do debriefings. And I really encourage to understand what a debriefing is and what it isn't. It's meant to be a learning opportunity. It is not a therapy session, a blame session. And there's also no research that indicates there's a golden time to debrief. You don't have to do it within 48 hours, nothing like that. I've been involved in debriefings that were a week later, 2 weeks later, and still really, really valuable. When you debrief, there's 4 fundamental questions. The first one stands on its own. What happened? We want to hear from people, facts and perspectives. I usually ask questions 2 and 3 together. What went well? What didn't go so well? Give that balanced perspective. And the fourth one is what needs to happen moving forward. What do we need to do? And it depends upon who's impacted. Again, is it something on a work site where we need to figure out how to lock that gate better? Is it something at the front desk so that we can have more resources for the staff working the front desk and more ways to communicate this with the public? That we're not trying to tell people you can't use our bathrooms, but we're trying to point out that we've had significant loss and we're trying to figure this out. So what do we do that helps us move forward? For those of you in offices too, again, it's often you don't expect this. You hear this, you go like, oh my goodness, I feel for the staff right at the front or the people out in the community that are dealing with the public. But what happens when the one person makes their way back to the offices? This is when you find out, oh my goodness, I didn't realize I have it. So if somebody comes into my office, I have my back to them. I've worked in places where they literally did like changes to where you can see who's coming in, or if you can't see, you put up mirrors and things like that. And so oftentimes these are the learning and teachable moments at the end of a situation that we're stronger for as a result. So this is essentially the presentation, and I will let you know that I'll still be sticking around if anybody has any individual questions, but I wanted to give you the opportunity. Do you have any questions, comments, or statements for the sake of the group that you want to ask at this time?
I think a lot of the de-escalation, the ability to, centers around knowing whether you're in an amygdala hijack or not.
Yeah.
How do you avoid that?
The
hijack in the first place.
Right.
How do you intervene as you're going down that pathway?
From years of experience, again, working in 8, 10, 12-hour, even times double shifts, 16-hour shifts in highly intense crisis psychiatric situations. The people that I see navigate it the best are the ones who are on top of their self-awareness. They're making sure they've eaten well, they've gotten their sleep, they're doing what they can to get rid of the distractions, right? These are my colleagues who weren't on their phone distracted by whatever, text messages coming in, and or they're honest about it, where it's like, I didn't get a good night's sleep, so pardon me if I'm a little bit off today, right? And you find that way to communicate with your colleagues in a way that's safe. You don't need to tell them everything, right? You don't need to say, I had nightmares about X, Y, and Z, give them all the details, but just, I had a bad night's sleep, right? Or I'm not feeling well. And that lets your coworkers know, and it also makes it easier so that you're less likely to have that amygdala hijack. Really like the way you put that, right? Because that's the scary thing is, the amygdala can get hijacked quickly. The messaging can happen. It's what helps you catch yourself in that moment. What are you doing preventatively, and what allows you that early intervention? I've worked in highly intense crisis teams that we would talk honestly about tagging each other out. I've seen situations where I knew my colleagues well enough to know somebody pushed their buttons. A statement, a touch, whatever, and we would say to our colleague, you step out, I got this, right? And we let each other know we've got support. Or again, if I'm stressed and I'm dealing with you and my helpful colleague Steve comes in and wants to help out too, I'm gonna start giving Steve little cues. And Steve's like, Marty, hey, you got a phone call in the back. The one psychiatric hospital I worked at, that was the safe phrase. You got a phone call in the back. And I remember my one colleague, who I won't say his name on here, right? He's like, I'm not expecting a phone call. And I'm like, you got a phone call in the back, right? Just like your coworkers want to help you, right? But we got to know when that amygdala hijack is going on. So any words we can say, gosh, I'm not sure what to do. I really want to figure this out. Let's figure this out. Let's have a seat. What helps calm you down? I do more from the chair. Better, right? Who fights from a chair, right? So that's why I invite myself to sit down. I watched your activities, right? Some of you were standing, right? And some of you, as part of your job, you're standing all the time. What do you do so that you're adjusting things and hopefully making it relaxed? One of my colleagues used to call it the lean back, that you kind of just adjust your body weight. You just kind of like lean back so that you're not leaning in. Because many of us, we lean in, whether you're hunched over a computer, hunched over your tool, whatever it is. And when you lean back, you give this non-threatening visual to the other person, and it can help you too. Does that help you remember to breathe, right? What brings you back to you so that you don't get hijacked by the other person or your own amygdala? Practice, practice, practice. Again, the people that look like they're like naturally calm, cool, and collected, most of them just practiced it over and over again. It's a good, great question. We all have to kind of find our own little ways. And again, when you work with others and they know it, it helps. Great question. Any other questions? I'll take the silence to mean no. Then I'll just say, thanks, everybody. You were all great. I appreciate 2.5 hours of your time. You get a little round of applause from me. Thank you so much. I'll be here for a while. I'm going to run out for lunch, but not right away. So if you have any individual questions, come on over to me over here, and I'm happy to take them. Thanks, everybody.